Mark, thank you so much for accepting this interview. I'm very, very pleased to be able to do that with you. We're going to put this interview in the context of your residency in Guernsey. If I remember well, you first came to Guernsey, well, a long time ago, but the first time you were involved with the festival was 2012, am I right?
Yeah, right at the beginning.
Where we exhibited. It was like, actually, we started the festival in 2010. That was 2 years after the first festival, and we exhibited, I remember very well, we exhibited the Shipping Forecast, which I'm a big fan of, and then also the Sounds of Two songs.
Yes.
So, I mean,
the only time those two have been shown together as well.
Oh yeah, it was true. Yeah. I wanted to. Obviously, we will come back about the Shipping Forecast and about those two very important pieces of work. But I would like to go back to the very beginning with you, and I would like to have a little bit of an idea about your childhood and what kind of child you were, and also how did you come to get involved with photography? What was your how the passion started in some way? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. My childhood was happy at home, but it wasn't so happy at school. I was quite overweight at school, and I started wearing glasses when I was about 12 years old. And the combination of those two things in Leicester in the 1960s, believe me, it wasn't conducive to making a lot of friends. So I was quite a lonely kid, I think. You know, I had friends I used to play Subbuteo with, but that was, I wasn't. And I was a very keen dinghy sailor. My dad made me my first little boat when I was 7 years old, and I carried on dinghy sailing competitively at quite a high level until I was 40, actually. So that was my social outlet, I suppose, was through all of that, the sailing club, I suppose. But at school, I was good at really only two subjects, English and art. A lot of kids are the same, I think.
They're great subjects.
And I think my parents wanted me to go to university to study English, but I always knew I wanted to be an artist, whatever that means, of some kind. So my dad was an engineer, and my mum had various administration jobs throughout her life, and my dad was very precise with everything he did. Everything had to be done, and so just so. Then I think when I was maybe 14, I went up to the loft, the attic, and I found this old enlarger that my dad had made. Out of an upturned flower pot and the lens off of his Voigtlander camera and a domestic light bulb inside and this piece of teak at the bottom, because he always made things out of teak, my dad. And so I said, "What's this?" And he said, "It's an enlarger." And he had all these developing tanks and things, because he had been in the Merchant Navy for 2 years during the 50s. And
I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, and I never really understood. That's where his love of the sea and boats came from, which was passed on to me. But I never really understood why. But he became a kind of ship's photographer. So he built this enlarger while he was on the ship, traveling around a lot in the Middle East. And some years later, I discovered this archive of pictures that he'd taken from the ship, and there was a few pictures of his mates and so forth, but most of the pictures were of these little, I say little, because of course they were actually huge oil tankers in the Gulf.
Yeah, but
every single one is a bit Father Ted, but it was a big thing far away.
Yeah,
and so a little thing on an always immaculately straight horizon, always in the middle. And so I'd like to do something with those one day, actually. But I think I remember him.
How old were you at the time?
I suppose when I discovered those, probably about 17 or something. And of course, I didn't know anything about the Beches or anything like that. But had I known what I know now,
of course,
I might have thought, "My God, Dad, this is amazing," because it was very rigid, I don't think there was any conceptual framework behind it or anything. But That's what he did. And I remember when I used to take a few snaps with various little cameras. My granddad got me my first camera with some Green Shield stamps, which was a sort of early loyalty card kind of thing. And I remember my dad very clearly saying, "Oh, the horizon isn't straight," in one of my pictures. And I think, like we do as kids, we always want to please our parents. And my dad was quite hard to please, to say the least. And I always wanted his. I always wanted to have something that told me that I was doing the right thing, and it was difficult to get from him. To be quite honest with you, it was never really good enough. But
I mean, in some way, you are very precise with
I know,
your work,
and exactly.
so
I'm
you
the most,
come
and
from somewhere as well.
And I really wish I wasn't. I mean, I collect photo books, and I don't buy many photo books by people who make work like me. I buy books by people who are much looser than I am. I'm very rigid in what I do, and I wish I could. I got rid of some of that during the work I made in Guernsey, and that was an important thing for me.
We will come back
way.
to that
But,
as well.
I mean, it's that the horizon must be straight all the time. It's like this mantra that goes on my head, and I think what I learned from that was that the horizon. If the horizon isn't going to be straight, then it's got to be clearly not straight for a reason, and that you've thought about it, and you know it's not straight. It's not a mistake. Something I used to say actually to students at college quite a lot was, if you're going to do something that breaks the mold a little bit, that breaks the rules, you've got to do it with purpose to make it look like you meant to do it, not. So let's take a straight horizon, for instance. There's this, and there's this, and there's that, and this is obviously intentional, and this looks like a mistake. So these little things, I learned, through trial and error. But a lot comes from my dad and his engineering background. But of course, he didn't know anything about photography. He just knew how to do it. Yeah. And I remember we went out and I took some terrible photographs of some trees. And then I came back home and he showed me how to process the film. We went to get some chemicals and we made some little prints. And of course, the alchemy of seeing your first print emerge in the developer is
absolutely.
Anybody that's ever done that is always remembers that moment. And I think but I wouldn't say I was hooked from that moment because I didn't know. I wanted to go to art school. I had to negotiate with my parents somewhat to go to art school in the first place because there were no artists in our family whatsoever, and so nobody really understood, including me, understood how you were supposed to make a living out of that. So I actually I did a foundation course, and then I got onto a graphic design degree course because my parents thought, well, that sounds like something you get a job from. And then within a term, I'd switched to fine art. So then I did 3 years working in the Life Room, and I was painting out in the landscape and so forth. And then in my third year, I did a little bit of photography. There was a moment that perhaps I could spend a couple of minutes talking about, is that I went to see a Mark Rothko exhibition in my third year. And we'd been taught at art school about how to look at a Rothko painting in the right way to make it wobble in front of you. You're supposed to focus behind the painting. So you have to know how to do that in order to get the right effect. So I went to see the Rothko show, and I stood there, and they were all wobbling around me, and it was all working fine, And then I left there, and there was a show nearby. I must have looked in my time out, and there was a show by one of only 2 photographers that I'd heard of at the time, which was Don McCullin. And I went to see the McCullin show, and there was one room I was in, I remember really distinctly, and there was me and a middle-aged woman, and she was looking at the pictures, and she was in floods of tears. Now, there could be any number of reasons why she was crying, but to this day I like to believe that it was because
of the photo,
the
emotional
photographs,
impact of the photography.
The way that immediately I thought, you have to know how to look at a Rothko painting to get but with photography, especially this kind of documentary photography, it was so immediate. You know, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but let's assume this woman had no photographic training whatsoever. She was just affected by the pictures. And I think that was a really profound moment in my shift from drawing, painting to making photographs.
And when you started sort of wanted to become a photographer, did you have any specific aspiration in terms of I want to be a war photographer or documentary photographer? Did you have that in mind, or more like already like because of your background in fine art, you wanted to really start exploring the sort of fine art side of photography?
I hate the term fine art for a start.
Okay.
But I think it's important in this kind of context, yes. Because I had no training in photography whatsoever. I didn't know how to be a photographer. I knew that there were wedding photographers, and I knew there were newspaper photographers. And I suppose I was more interested in being a newspaper photographer, but I didn't know how to do that. When I left, so I didn't really have any aspirations. I certainly didn't think, I want to be a Magnum one day or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was never entered my head. You know.
But what the aspiration? When I mean aspiration could be also just becoming a professional photographer, making money out of photography.
Yeah, I suppose I wanted to make a living from it, but I had absolutely no idea. So at first I started to try and bring painting and photography together. I didn't know anything about people like Gerhard Richter at the time, which might have been helpful. So I was really struggling with this idea. I just felt like I was wearing two hats that just neither of them were fitting properly. So when I left college in 1981, I worked as a dustman for a few months to earn some money, and then for the Brighton Council, and then, because I went to art school in Brighton. I grew up in Leicester, in the middle of the country, a long way from the sea. Moved to Brighton to go to art school, which of course, Leicester to Brighton was quite a revelation, even in the late 70s. And it was the birth of punk and all of this sort of, it was a really exciting time to be in Brighton. So I worked as a dustman, and then I went travelling for a couple of years, ended up in Australia, and and while I was travelling, I took with me a little sketchbook and pencils and stuff, and a cheap £50 Fujica camera with a standard lens, and I found myself more and more interested in taking pictures. And I think that at first it was probably because it felt like it was easier, and also I never felt comfortable with this idea, drawing something in public. And people would, if you ever see anyone drawing in public, you have to go and see what they're doing.
Start looking at what
and
you're
I
doing.
really didn't like that. And so I started taking these pictures. And the funny thing is that I remember I took 213 rolls of black and white film, 35mm film. And I know that.
For your travel?
Yeah. And I was sending the films back to my parents in batches because I couldn't carry all this stuff. So I didn't process anything until I got back 2 years later. And then I took about a year, or 6 months to a year, processing and contact sheeting all the films. And when you look at the development of my development, pardon the pun, but through these contact sheets, I do get better. Number 213 is better than number 1, but boy, oh boy, it's a slow progress, because I wasn't learning by my mistakes. I was getting bolder. I think that's what I was doing. I was getting, to quote Robert Capa, I was getting closer, so the pictures were getting better. I'll misquote Robert Capa, but funny enough, I've gone the other way.
But isn't that true that when people start photography, most of the time they think that it's a quick process to learn, but actually it's not the technical aspect which is a long process. It's pretty basic to learn photography, but the ways of seeing is actually, that's probably what takes the longest.
No, absolutely right, and you know, of course, I thought I was God's gift to photography at the beginning, as we all do, because I knew nothing about photography whatsoever. I didn't know anything about the history of photography. I had this bizarre idea that if I didn't know anything, that I would, if I didn't know about the work of anybody else, I would make this revelatory, you know, new kind of photography. I mean, that is absolutely a mistake.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the time that, you know, yes, I was doing it because it felt easier, but I was also really easily pleased with what I was doing because it was all new to me, you know. When I was doing the prints back, you know, when I got back home and so forth, you know, I was really excited by this. And now, of course, I look back and I think that's just rubbish what I was doing then, you know. So although it feels easier, actually, as long as you keep your aspirations for your own work keep going up and up and up, then, you know, it's not, you soon find out it's not easier at all, actually.